邀请政界、商界、学界最强大脑。他创办国际交流盛会，见证半个世纪的全球化历程。作为中国改革有益奖章的获得者，他说：“中国发展有一种特别的势头与决心。”80多岁仍保持健身习惯，并挑战滑雪马拉松。他表示，好奇心是勇往直前的秘诀。世界经济论坛创始人兼执行主席克劳斯·施瓦布接受高端访谈专访，敬请收看。
关注国际焦点，洞察世界风云。大家好，欢迎来到本期的高端访谈，我是周韵。2024年世界经济论坛年会召开之际，我们来到了位于瑞士日内瓦的论坛总部，即将在这里对话论坛创始人兼执行主席克劳斯·施瓦布。作为论坛掌门人，他如何将阿尔卑斯山上的一个宁静小镇达沃斯转变为群贤毕至的全球交流平台？作为中国改革有益奖章获得者，他如何看待中国的发展和现代化道路？本届年会以重建信任为主题，施瓦布对于弥合信任赤字、推动合作发展不断向前，又有着怎样的见解呢？今天我们一起在对话中寻找答案。
Hello.
Hello, finally, again. Good to
No,
see you.
great pleasure. So,
No, the pleasure is all
be with
mine.
you this afternoon.
Yes, great. Thank you so much.
It's the snow of Geneva.
I know, and the minute when we arrived, when we
Yeah.
got landed, it started snowing.
Hello, everybody.
And you know, actually, snow has a really positive sign in China.
Yeah.
It means prosperity and all the good things.
Professor Schwab, thank you so much for joining us today at probably the busiest time of the year for you, with political leaders, business elites, and representatives from diverse sectors coming to Davos for the annual meeting. So to start with, Professor, what do you think we can expect from this year's annual meeting, and why was rebuilding trust chosen as the theme?
First, the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum is taking place at the beginning of the year. And in such a way, it allows global decision makers to take the pulse of the state of the world and to do so in a very integrated, holistic way. And afterwards also to look for common ground and, if possible, to find some solutions for the numerous problems we have today. Now, why did we choose the theme or the motto, rebuilding trust? Right. If we compare the world today with the world before we had the COVID pandemics, we find a completely different mood. First, the world has become very fearful, very fragmented, of course.
Right.
In such a situation, trust have vanished. We have lost trust to a certain extent in each another, because we all have become under the pressure of the crisis, of the multiple crises. We have become more egoistic. So, and if you are more egoistic, you think first of yourself, and this distorts an atmosphere of trust. So if we want to recreate, and that's the objective of the annual meetings this year, we want to recreate a new spirit, a much more constructive spirit. Again, looking forward and having confidence in our future. And that's the reason why we have chosen this theme, rebuilding trust. And trust means you have to be a trustee. If you do not look just after yourself, but if you look after the community you are part of, you are trusted. So theme has in principle two dimensions. First, to regain trust into the future. And second, to remind everybody that we should assume trusteeship for our global community, for our global future, and I should add, for nature.
Well, Professor, according to the newly released report by the World Economic Forum, the Global Risks Report 2024, in which it pointed out that misinformation and disinformation are the biggest short-term risks, while extreme weather and critical change for Earth systems are the biggest long-term concerns. So, Professor, what worries you the most at the moment?
What worries me most is not just one thing. It's several challenges which we have to face simultaneously. And it's not just a crisis. It's a systemic transformation which we witness in the world. Crisis is usually short-term, but the transformation will take some time. So we have first an economic transformation with reshaping of supply chains, with, let's say, the debt loads which we have with inflation and so on. Then we have a geopolitical transformation because we have moved from a one-polar world to a multipolar world with two big powers, US and China, and many emerging powers like India. Europe is still a power, but you also have here tech companies which have become very powerful actors in the world. So the world has become much more complex, much more fragmented. And of course you have much more tensions in such a world. And unfortunately, some of those tensions have led to actually hot conflicts, to wars. But then we have, in addition, the challenge of the ecological, environmental transformation. We still too much dependent on carbon. I think this year was the hottest year in the world. We have already reached the tipping point of 1.5 centigrades, which scientists say is a point of no return where afterwards you cannot repair anymore the damage which has been done. So we have to do the energy transition. We have to preserve biodiversity. And so on so forth. So it's the geopolitical, the economic, the environmental, and finally you have the technological. I had written in 2016 this book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
And now we are in the exponential phase of the development of some of the technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, particularly artificial intelligence, but also quantum computing, and I could go on and on. So here we have to make sure that those technologies, which will completely change, so it will change the way how we live, it will change business model, it will change competition among countries.
So it seems that you're a little bit concerned about this pessimism that people, the pessimistic attitude that people are holding towards the future.
I'm very concerned about the pessimism because pessimism leads to a certain lethargy. It leads to crisis management.
What do you think could be the new way out?
What we want to achieve at the annual meeting in Davos is to look forward, to look how do we want to end up in a positive way when we go through those transformations.
施瓦布的担忧让人们想起了7年前习近平主席在世界经济论坛年会开幕式上的演讲。2017年的世界逆全球化风潮和保护主义抬头，世界经济复苏乏力，南北差距加大。习近平主席在题为“共担时代责任，共促全球发展”的主旨演讲中，引用了狄更斯的名言：“这是最好的时代，也是最坏的时代。”他把握经济全球化的历史大势，着眼构建人类命运共同体，明确提出了引领世界经济走出困境的中国主张。极大地鼓舞了深陷阴霾的世界，引发了国际社会的强烈反响。
人类文明进步历程从来没有平坦的大道可走，人类就是在同困难斗争中前进的。 再大的困难都不可能阻挡人类前行的步伐。遇到了困难，不要埋怨自己，不要指责他人，不要放弃信心，不要逃避责任，而是要一起来战胜困难。历史是勇敢者创造的，让我们拿出信心，采取行动，携手向着未来前进。谢谢大家。
It was a very, very important speech at a historical moment. What we need in the world is sunshine, and your speech has brought us some sunshine into our discussions.
During the speech, President Xi made a very strong case about advancing globalization, about embracing multilateralism and rejecting protectionism. Now, about 7 years later, how do you think this very important speech continue to have profound resonance given the current global sentiment?
We first have to recognize that the world has changed. The world has undergone or is undergoing those transformation, and here particularly the transformation from a unipolar to a multipolar world. And China has to play what I call, and is playing, a responsible and responsive role in this new global setting. And you are right, the speech of President Xi in 2017 was welcomed by many people because it showed that China will take on this responsible and responsive role. And we have seen in the past several new initiatives of China on a global level related to security, related to the economy, related to our shared global future. I think what is important is now to translate all those principles into the new context and to accept that the world to a certain extent has changed.
What kind of leader he is to you?
President Xi is certainly an impressive leader. I think everybody felt that his speech touched the nerves of many people in a very positive way.
Well, Professor Schwab, another prominent topic that is now under the spotlight at the annual meeting is the evolving Chinese economy. What is your take on the prospect of China's economic trajectory, and what do you think could be the new driving force?
When I came to China in 1979, 45 years ago, and I compare it with today, I have to say this journey of economic development was so impressive. Let's just look at some figures. GDP in 79 was 100 times lower compared to what it is. More than 100 times. Trade volume was far more than 100 times smaller than today. And I could go on. I mean, China at that time was clearly a very underdeveloped country. Today it has taken the leadership in many technologies. So I have seen many instances where people said, China has now hit the end of its dynamic developments, and today we are in the same situation. I'm sure that China will respond to the challenges of aging society, of debt, of the real estate market, and will find a new pattern of economic growth, because we should not forget, even if China has so much multiplied its GDP and today represents about 20% of global GDP. But if you take GDP per person, it's still lower than in the most developed countries. And so there's still room for development and economic growth and dynamism. All countries at the moment go through, let's say, difficult economic times for different reasons. But I feel China will have the wisdom to address the particular challenges which are facing the Chinese economy.
Professor, you just recalled this engagement with China, which dated back to 1970s. As you just said, you first visited China in 1979. Actually, I know that at the time you weren't alone. You were with a group of European business delegation, about 20 CEOs together. And that was at the very beginning of China's opening up and reform policy. And at that time, very early days, you were very certain that China was going to play a vital role on the world stage. At that time, you were certain. So I'm always curious to know that what sustained this constant optimism about China's development, and what's your interpretation of China's path towards modernization?
I would say if you study Chinese history, and I was always to a certain extent a fan of Chinese history, Chinese culture. I like history, and in my free time I prefer to read history books. So if you go back to the history, we should not forget the important role, the leading role China has played in the past. And I think there was an inner will of China, I cannot describe it, but some kind of a momentum to regain in terms of economic dynamics and development. So I just felt at that time a country with so many people, certainly by adopting the reform and opening up policies, should have a much brighter future.
Well, Professor Schwab, in 2005, you proposed the idea of a summer Davos in China in addition to the annual meeting here in Switzerland. So what was the rationale behind such a vision? And now, years later, what do you think is the greatest contribution of summer Davos?
Yeah. We have to make sure that the world is not split into a western and the eastern part. And that was a consideration at that time. So we felt we should have two legs. One leg more, even if Switzerland is a neutral country, but we should have one leg in the transatlantic space and one leg in the Asian space. And here, of course, to choose the biggest economy, to choose China was the most appropriate selection. So I'm very glad that we had the foresight as a forum at that time to build up this important, I personally, we look already forward to be in Dalian in summer this year.
Well, Professor, since its founding in 1971, the Davos now has evolved from a small snow resort to a glittering collaborative global platform where world leaders come and also brainstorm about the solutions for the most pressing issues. So what do you think is the secret in attracting leaders from around the world come all the way to Davos? And is this the kind of a picture that you have envisioned about 5 decades ago when you first started it?
No, it was a building up to the situation which characterizes our activities today. But I have to say, Davos is not just a meeting. There are many meetings in the world. There are some very important success factors, which means that Davos is needed, particularly at this time. Because if you look at the big challenges in the world, like, let's say, the environmental threats, they can be resolved only if you bring business, governments, civil society, academia together. And the World Economic Forum has become actually the foremost global organization. We call it stakeholder organization, where all the stakeholders of global society have their seat. And that not just by choosing one, but by being really representative of the world. Because if I look at the governmental participation, there are over 100 governments who are represented by the head of state or the head of government, or by very substantial ministerial delegations. If you look at the business community, we think that out of the 1,000 top global companies, about 70% will be represented in Davos by the top person. That's a unique, and then if you look at the academia and science, we try to be always a step ahead. No, we try to have a very forward-looking approach and to place ourselves 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead. So technology is always very important for us.
There are some people arguing that platforms like the World Economic Forum are more needed when major challenges occur, like the 2008 financial crisis, like the pandemic. So as the founder of this forum, how can you ensure that it's always relevant and is always up to date?
I think you have to have always your antenna into the future. I'm a very curious person. I have many discussions with people who are at the forefront of science, of political science also, of social science. And to remain relevant means to be very foresighted and to have a program which really does not repeat what other people are doing, but which brings this very specific future orientation to the table of discussions.
As you just mentioned, that the hyper-growth of technologies, especially artificial intelligence, are under the spotlight at the forum. And last year, China launched the AI governance initiative at the Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation. I'm sure you have heard of it. And I think you also said before, you have defined AI as a game changer. So, Professor, from your perspective, is artificial intelligence more of a blessing or a curse to you? And what role do you think China could play in the development and governance of AI?
First of all, whether artificial intelligence is a blessing or a curse depends on us. In my opinion, it's a great opportunity. It can provide us with a completely new, flourishing economy. But we have to be prepared because many jobs will have to be reskilled or upskilled. It's a little bit like moving from an agricultural society to a manufacturing society. Then we moved from a manufacturing society to a service society. And now we make another big step. And I would call it, we move into the intelligent society with the help of artificial intelligence. But artificial intelligence could also have very serious negative consequences. For example, fake news. It can reinforce fake news. It can distort elections. It can spread rumors very easily. So we have to create the guardrails. We have to create precautionary measures to ensure that artificial intelligence is to the benefit of humankind and does not lead us into a kind of apocalyptic world. But artificial intelligence has so many dimensions. There's the question of intellectual property. There's the question of impact on competition, the national security aspect, and so on. And I think it's very important that we work together. And I'm very pleased to see at the annual meeting also China involved. I think we absolutely need China at the table when we discuss a global framework. And we don't know, it could be similar to what we have in the environmental area with the COP meetings. It could be similar to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. But we have to find a global mechanism to keep the negative consequences of artificial intelligence under control.
1971年，施瓦布刚过而立之年，即将赴日内瓦大学商学院任教。一场出于兴趣组织的论坛，为他开启了人生的另一种可能。这就是欧洲管理论坛、世界经济论坛的前身。50多年来，对世界经济论坛而言，施瓦布是创始者，也是推动者，是掌门人，也是代言人。施瓦布的人生与世界经济论坛的发展相互交织。通过这一平台，他结识了妻子，并在这个平台上让他的经济理论构想落地为现实，拥抱中国的改革开放。顺着历史轴线向前回溯，出生于2战期间的施瓦布，幼年时曾随父母穿越德国与瑞士分界线，一面是战争，一面是和平。他目睹过战火吞没港口，也见证过人们重建家园。在学者身份之外，施瓦布有着投身公共事务的心愿，世界经济论坛成为了承载他心愿的载体。
Well, Professor, you have a unique and broad set of life experience. You survived war when you were a child, and you earned 5 degrees in mechanical engineering and economics by the age of 27. And by 31, you became the youngest university professor here in Switzerland. And in your 70s, you participated in the ski marathon. That's 42 kilometers. That's really impressive. And even now, in your 80s, I heard from your colleagues that you're still working tirelessly every day and keep a very active exercise routine. So what always have inspired and motivated you to move forward?
It is curiosity about the world, and also fortunately, I feel in a good physical shape. I actually wanted to run the marathon again this year, but I was doing some exercise. I was jogging, and I hurt my knee. I may dream again to do it next year, because I will not be able this year. But I think it's a curiosity, and it's also, look, humankind was always driven by the narrative to create a better world for the next generation or next generations. And if I look at my grandchildren, I always think statistically, my grandchildren will be still alive at the year when we go into the next century. So, in 75 years or so. If I look at all the changes in the world, I think we should make sure we should recreate, and I come back to the beginning of our interview, we should come back to the sense of trusteeship for the next generation. And trusteeship means a great responsibility. So it's not just curiosity, it's a certain sense of responsibility which is driving me.
Professor, I know you have deep appreciation for the Chinese culture, and also you're a big lover of Chinese dumplings and Peking duck. And you have sent congratulations on several Chinese New Years. And as we all know, the Chinese Spring Festival is approaching. So what would be your wishes extended to our Chinese viewers?
I would wish the Chinese people and the world in general I think I can summarize it in 2 words: peace and prosperity. And if I would add one last word, inner satisfaction, which means happiness.
So happiness, peace, and prosperity.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Professor, today for talking with us and sharing with us your very insightful views. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much.
在专访当中，施瓦布多次提到信任对当今世界的重要性。在他看来，面对经济、地缘政治、科技等全球性变化，人类急需重建对彼此、对未来的信任。他还表示，习近平主席2017年出席世界经济论坛年会发表的主旨演讲，体现出宝贵的责任和担当，触动了全球各国参会者的心弦。他期待中国同世界各国一道，以信任为本，凝聚共识，完善全球治理，走向光明未来。感谢您收看本期的高端访谈，我是邹韵，我们下期再会。